Thank you for being here for this new meetup. Hi Paris is a center of research on artificial intelligence and big data that was founded in 2020 by HEC Paris and the schools of IPP, of Institut Polytechnique de Paris, in an effort to gain research, cutting-edge research competence in AI in particular. Since 2020, we've been organizing these meetups. Meetups are those special evenings during which you can discover the work of our researchers as well as the work of people in the field. So we invite routinely several researchers from our schools as well as external speakers. And tonight will be exactly that. We're going to talk about fake news detection. In a year from now, we have the presidential elections in this country, so we are very interested in knowing to what extent we should be on our toes when reading the news. And I'm going to have a first chapter of tonight's event be presentations of each of our speakers in turn. They will each speak for 15 minutes, 12 to 15 minutes, after which we'll take one or two questions from the audience on their work specifically. And once all four presentations will have gone by, all the researchers and myself will go and have a roundtable on stage before we turn to you for more questions, more generally about fake news. Does that sound good? All right. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to invite on stage Oana Goga, who is going to first define what fake news are and tell us about her work.
Thank you. So I'm a research scientist at INRIA, and my research focuses on AI safety and analyzing risks with online platforms. Now, that can be very wide. It can go from disinformation and fake news to protection of children to auditing algorithmic manipulation and security and privacy. Probably you all heard the headlines that social media is ruining our democracies, that algorithms are trying to manipulate us, and that fake news is everywhere. So some of these things are true, some of these are exaggerated, and today I'm going to show you what the data actually tells us. So before going into the findings, I want to set up the stage because understanding how users are getting informed is actually the base of understanding what are the risks. So sometime before the middle of 20,000s, before social media, users used to get information by directly going to a website or buying a newspaper. And what we call this is like selective information exposure. Yeah, users have the agency in deciding what news they go and read. And typically, these news were curated by someone from the TV or the news agency. Now, in the mid-2000s, this changed with social media, and all of a sudden we are moving from a paradigm where it's selective information exposure to incidental information exposure, meaning that users are just passively going online and without controlling, they are exposed to information. And now, the information you are going to get exposed on social media, it's actually decided by algorithms and friends and not by a journalistic curator as it was before. And the recent survey in the US, they were saying that more than half of the US users are mainly using social media as their main source of information. So it's an important and big part of how we get informed. Okay, so when we talk about risk in the public sphere, there are mainly four things we talk about. One is the dissemination of disinformation online through social media. The second one is the emergence of filter bubbles or echo chambers. Then we have foreign interference and influence in these coordinated influence campaigns that can be mounted on this on social media. And finally, we have all this risk related to how easy it is now to generate content that is related to politics and news. Now, on a more conceptual base, it's important to make the distinction between the risks that are coming from platforms and algorithms. These are because the platform decided on a certain set of parameters that are inherent in their platforms and algorithms. And the other one is third parties, maybe malicious actors, that are using this design architecture for something specific that they want to be. It can be cybercrime, but it can also be there to spread disinformation and influence people. So we know that these risks are real, but the question is, what is the scale of these risks? And when I started to work on this topic of disinformation, I realized there is actually very little data about the scale of the risks. For instance, the most basic question is to which extent users are exposed to fake news. And we don't know. And the reason that we don't know is that online platforms, they are closed, and it's very hard for us or from other auditors to understand what users are actually seeing when they go online. So to be able to tackle this, and what we proposed at that time, which was a bit crazy, it was to actually to design an infrastructure that allows people to donate private data to science. In the same way that you are donating blood for hospitals, we were asking people to donate their private data so that we can finally see what is happening and have some actual numbers. So we deployed this tool that we built, Check My News, in the US before the election, in Brazil before election. We had about 1,000 users in each campaign, and this is the findings that we extracted from this data. So, basic question: how much disinformation people actually see? So what we saw is that 60% of the news-related posts people see are coming from factual sources, and 5% are coming from sources that are known to have spread disinformation in the past. The rest, it's unknown or it's mixed. So what we see is that misinformation, it is there, but is not the dominant source of information. And the majority of the information that people see, it's actually factual. Now, you could argue that 5% it's a lot. What I'm arguing is that this is a data point in time, and it's interesting to see how this evolves across time. The second question is that I, as a computer scientist, I'm most interested in it, is to which extent algorithms are playing a role in exposure to disinformation. And for this, we need to understand what are the mechanisms behind information exposure. So first, when you go on your social media, you can select who to follow. So this is a form of selective information exposure. Then the news-related post can come from the network, from your friends with whom you choose to be friends. Then we have algorithms that are purely recommending you content that might be interesting. And finally, it's targeted advertising. So traditionally, targeted advertising has been seen as, oh, here it's a pair of Nike shoes because you are interested in sports, but the same mechanisms can be also used to send information, political content or news, and we do see quite a bit of data that this mechanism is widely used. So when we look at what is the fraction of misinformation in these 4 categories, what we see is that users are more likely to see fake news because they chose to subscribe to sources that are known for spreading misinformation than to receive them because of algorithms or their friends. What I'm saying is not that the numbers are not strikingly different, but it's important to understand where you put the blame, and the picture is a bit more nuanced than just algorithms are promoting misinformation. The second question that we had is whether we do have filter bubbles. And we know all this media is presenting social networks, like inducing people in filter bubbles. So we actually went and measured this. So for this, you have multiple measures of diversity, and what we chose, it's balance. Balance means that you have 1/3 of your information diet comes from the other source. So what we found is that if we look at the whole information diet of users, we have 35% of users that have balanced information diets. But if we exclude and only looked at what users choose to follow, it's 13%. So what we see is that users mainly follow pages that have a similar political leaning with them, but algorithms and the network are exposing users to a more diverse set of news. So now we talked about to what information users are exposed, but this is only half of the picture, and the other one is how users interact with this information. And again, we started with very basic questions. So the first is, do users check the information that they see before that they share? So whenever you see and you decided, oh, I'm going to share this, do they actually click to read the actual article before they share? And what we see is that only 14% of times users actually click and read the article. So most of the time people are exposed to some news article and then they decide to reshare it without even clicking and reading what it is inside. Now, on a more positive side, we also look at whether users are interacting with articles with opposing views. And this was a study done in the US. So you have Democrats and Republicans, and then you have left-leaning and right-leaning sources. And what we found out is that if we look at shares and likes, people mostly interact with the same, with congruent articles that support the same political leaning. But when we look at hidden interaction, meaning users actually going and clicking and reading the article, we see the other story. So what we see is that people, they do, whenever they have an article that comes from the opposing view, they don't share it, but they do and read it. And so this is one of the more positive findings that we had. Okay, so another way of looking at the problem is to compare how is the information on Facebook, on social media, comparing with the information that is outside of social media, meaning like you go directly to Le Monde, Le Figaro, L'Echo, these sorts of news websites. So first thing that we checked is whether Facebook is driving reading. And we thought that it could be a big fraction, but surprisingly, only 4% of all the news articles that people are checking are coming from Facebook. And this is surprising because on one hand, they are saying that Facebook is their main source of information, but on the other hand, they don't read articles that are coming from Facebook. So there is something strange happening there. The second question, is there more misinformation on social media? The answer is yes. We have almost 6% on Facebook, less than 3% outside Facebook. And does social media increase diversity? And the question again here is yes. Okay. So this, until now, we only discussed about what users read and how they interact, but the other part of the ecosystem is who is actually producing the news. And here, what we found is that we propose a method to automatically discover news pages and pages that are claiming to be news providers. And what we found out is that at least the ecosystem, it's at least 3 times higher than what it's currently known. So this is important for both research, but also for the public to be able to have methods that are able to discover the whole the entirety of the news ecosystem, especially because in terms of follower and interactions, they are half of the picture. Now, while doing this study, we also observe, like here, it's the creation date of pages and websites that are talking about news. And we observe that there are these peaks just before elections. So the question was, is there any coordination that is happening? So we cooked up these clustering mechanisms that it's using a bunch of data. And we found out quite a bit of clusters where we already know some of them in bold that they are known for spreading misinformation. And we found other domains that were unknown, but they are clustered together based on our signals. Okay, so this is what we were today. So now, just before finishing, I want to end up with where we are going to be tomorrow, because there is a new shift that is happening, and it is more and more common, and we have evidence from data traces that people are using more and more conversational AI systems to ask about politics and about news. So this brings a whole new list of possible threats that ranges from what are some biases that language models have when presenting information, how can we audit these systems, what is their impact on the business model of current news organizations, and maybe not everything it's bad, maybe there are also opportunities for citizens to get better informed and understand better the political manifestos and the political policy that parties are proposing. Just to finish up with a call to action, so to design, to have safer online platforms, researchers need data to be able to audit them. So we are trying to build this European platform observatory that allows people to donate data on other platforms. And on my website, there is a link to a mailing list. If you want to help us out, please subscribe, and we are going to contact you when we are ready. Thank you.
Are there questions for Oana about her research before we proceed to the second talk? Any urgent question? Yes.
I had a question about the websites that deal with news that are created before elections and events. Did you monitor if they stay after the events, or they're just used for one event?
Yeah, there are many that they are just used for one event. There are some others that get reactivated when needed. And there are others that stay all the time present.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. So towards the end of your talk, you mentioned that you need at one point to audit the LLM used by people to get information about politics. Can you elaborate on this? What does that mean to audit an opaque LLM?
So for now, we don't know how users are using LLMs and what are the risks. So ideally, you would like users to give you data about the conversation that they had with their preferred AIs. You want to. There are two things. You want to understand user behavior, so that it's whatever you're doing, it's based on actual use. And then you have different auditing methods where you can artificially create prompts in order to test for biases. So two methods here.
Thank you so much, Oana. And please welcome Oana Balalau.
Hello, everyone. So my name is also Oana. I'm sorry for you. So my name is Oana Balalau. I am a researcher at INRIA, and I work on natural language processing. And in particular, I'm interested in argumentation mining and information extraction. And today I'm going to show how we use these tools to see the multi-aspects of fact-checking, in particular, how to verify, what to verify, and how to source the facts. So I will start with automated fact-checking using statistical data. I will proceed to show you the challenge of fact-checking climate commitments, and then I will discuss about extracting reliable data. So the enemy of fact-checking, the thread that is going to put everything together is the fact that the enemy of fact-checking are the huge volume of unstructured data and the vague language. So the first part is a collaboration between researchers at INRIA and Radio France, in particular the team Vrai-ou-Faux of France Info. So in fact-checking in France is quite successful, and we have two main actors. So we have France Info with Le Vrai du Faux and Les Décodeurs. They regularly publish trying to debunk claims that are made in the public. There is, however, a problem with trying to cover all the claims that are made, so there is this asymmetry of time. So creating fake statistics takes a few seconds, while manual verification can take hours. So the problem is that disinformation can scale much faster than the truth. So what we tried to do in our work was to help journalists from Radio France to speed up their fact-checking efforts. So they are still the one doing the fact-checking, but we are helping them, providing tools to do this faster. So in particular, we developed StatCheck, which is currently being deployed at Radio France. StatCheck has two inputs. So the first one is a text. So this is the claim that we want to fact-check. The claim can come from social media, from any other document. This text, we are going to split it and find statistical claims. That is, claims that refer to statistical entities that are being measured regularly and for which we can find information. We are going to do this claim detection in the text, and then we are going to generate a query that can then be launched on a database. So what database? Well, the second part of our tool is taking a reference data set, that is data sets we know that are good and they have quality information, that we are going to use to help journalists fact check the statistical claims. So we are taking INSEE and Eurostat, and we are creating an index database that can then be queried with the claims that have been made by the public. In the end, our system is going to give what are the claims that should be fact-checked in a corpus, and what are the top case statistical facts that could be used to fact-check those claims. So in our work, we mostly focused on the claim detection part, so we tried to improve algorithms for claim detection, and the querying part, so finding facts that are relevant to a particular claim. So this is the first work that we did, and it's actually a very nice work, and it falls really in the classical case of fact-checking. So we have a nice claim that has numbers, and then we have a nice data set that we can go and look if the numbers are correct. Unfortunately, a real world is not like this. So I'm going to discuss in next what happens if the text we want to check is not sufficiently clear, and what happens if we don't have a reference database. So, what to fact check? So what happens if we want to fact check climate commitments? So this work is a collaboration between INRIA, Telecom, and Amundi. And we wanted to see what companies are publishing in their transition plans as they communicate in those transition plans on how they try to achieve their emission reduction target. So is it possible to fact check these plans? So one might think that yes, because they give a lot of information around their transition plan, so normally we should be able to verify it. However, we have plans that are very often large unstructured documents, hence they difficult to fact check, and in addition, we will see that they are quite vague as documents. So what we wanted to, the problem that we wanted to tackle is to see if we can, if a transition plan is evaluable. That means if it's mitigation measures, that is the measures they propose to reduce their carbon footprint, are sufficiently well described in order to assess if the mitigation measure is going to achieve what we hope it will achieve. So for example, here we have a mitigation measure, switching our company fleet to electric vehicle, we reduce our carbon footprint by 5%. So here we know the decrease in the carbon footprint that the mitigation measure will try to achieve, which is a good example. So why we want to achieve that? Because without verification, companies might engage in greenwashing. So in order to see if the transition plans proposed by the companies are sufficiently well detailed to be able to verify them, we have developed an extraction and classification pipeline that uses LLMs for analyzing these transition plans. So in particular, here we have an example of an input plan. In this input plan, in this text, we are going to have several tasks. So the first one is to find the mitigation measures that are being proposed. Here we have 3 mitigation measures. So the company is proposing to upgrade its office lighting. It's proposing to install a solar power system, and also is proposing to electrify its corporate vehicle fleet. So the first question is are these measures already done? Are they ongoing? Or are they being considered? So after we do the extractions, we are doing also this classification step to see what is the temporal information associated with each measure. And then the next step is very important. So do we have some quantitative attributes related to these measures? So do we know, for example, what is the expected gain in efficiency, or what is the expected decrease in the carbon footprint that each measure is going to achieve? So these are the quantitative attributes. Then we have a next step where we look at what type of measures are going to be proposed. So this is very interesting, and we use it for a large-scale analysis of transition plans. And later we also have other tasks. For example, we look if the measure, what is the perimeter of a measure? So is it proposed for which part of the company? Here we have a measure that is proposed for offices and another that is proposed for company fleets. So we have developed this pipeline, which we have tested, and we have evaluated with it a large volume of transition plans. So we looked at over 1,000 transition plans to see what our tools were able to tell us about how good quality these transition plans are. So we observed that out of this over more than 1,000 transition plans, 80% of them contain at most 2 measures with quantitative information. So 80% of them are very poorly described in terms of what quantitative information the measures are going to achieve. And most concerning, only 9 plans of these 1,100 gave sufficient numerical information to be able to estimate if the company are going to achieve their carbon reduction goal. We observe also very vague promises, so nearly 40% of the proposed actions are internally generic statements, such as improve energy efficiency, without any other information to understand how this is going to be achieved. So the key takeaway here is that in this case, it's not possible to fact-check companies because we do not have sufficient information to verify their claims. Their claims are so vague that they could mean anything. So what we need to do is to write better legislation to force them to give more details so that we can then fact-check their claims. So finally, I'm going to discuss about the last part. So to do fact-checking, we need to have, of course, good quality claims, but we also need to have a reliable ground truth. In the first example, I told you that with Radio France, we have used statistical data to do fact-checking. In particular, we use the data of INSEE and Eurostat. In this last project, we wanted to see if we can say if a scientist has conflicts of interest or not. And this was a collaboration between INRIA, BIT Pilani, and Le Monde. So how can we create good quality data that we can then use for fact-checking if this data doesn't exist, and why is this important? So this is an example of a French scientist, Michel Aubier. He was and still is a renowned specialist in respiratory diseases, and he was known for his public stances regarding the effects of air pollution. So he has his main employer was APHP and the French National Authority for Health. However, he also worked on the side for the oil company Total. And he often downplayed the health effects of the diesel and air pollution in the media. When he applied to work for the French National Authority of Health, he did not disclose his conflict of interest with Total. That was later found, and in 2017, he was convicted for not declaring a conflict of interest. So if we have cases like this, where public institutions, they want to rely on experts to make informed decisions, and these experts should declare their conflict of interest, how can we fact check that this what they have declared is the complete information or even the correct information? So in France, we do have an initiative, the Transparence Santé, that was created especially for doctors, so they can declare the conflicts of interest, the money they have received for companies. However, this initiative has been criticized. And here we observe also the illusion of objectivity. So we rely on independent experts to inform us, but a hidden conflict might secretly impair their judgment. So here we want to see if we can ourselves create from scratch a high-quality database. How can we do that? In our case, we focused on scientists, and in particular the declarations that they make in research papers. So this is, of course, not the complete information, but still it's a resource that hasn't been used before. So we wanted to see if we could design information extraction pipeline that could create a very high quality database that contains the financial and collaborative relations between between researchers and companies. So we managed to do that. So we managed to create a pipeline that extracts high quality data. And I will show you the case study to wrap it up. So we applied this pipeline on a real case. That was a real example that was suggested by us, by Stéphane Aurel from Le Monde. So she said we should compare these two journals, RTP and TAP, that are journals in toxicology and pharmacology, because she has a strong hunch one is less quality than, has less quality publications than the other. So she had this hunch just by manually looking, I don't know how many articles. So we could verify this using our pipeline. So we observe that corporate employees were 9 times more present in the first journal than in the second. And in addition, corporations were 3 times more frequent in explicit conflict of interest declaration in the first one. So what this shows is that it is important also to create quality data when this doesn't exist to help the effort of fact-checking. So I'm wrapping up. So what I have described are current challenges, but also solutions. So tools and repositories. We need automated verification paired with reliable fact databases. We need also to regulate, because we can only verify what is explicitly disclosed. And I have also worked on another topic, but I haven't discussed it today. We also need to make sure that the LLMs tool that we are using do not hallucinate, and I have also worked on this part. What should we do next? Well, we also should focus on more complex type of fact-checking. So in particular, we should go beyond facts. Fact-checking systems usually struggle in the presence of sophisticated manipulations, because we could have individual facts that are stated in an article. However, the underlying claims that are made, that are most likely not explicit, are false. So how can we find this? I have recently received an internal chair from High Paris, in which I will work on building systems to detect biased text. This biased text is a text that shows you only one perspective of a certain event. It's hiding other things, incorporating subtle techniques such as propaganda, fallacy, and deceptive framing. So this was all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oana. Excellent. Any question from the audience on Oana's presentation?
I would like to know the kind of argumentative framework you are using for the first part, for detecting how to fact check. Can you tell us about the argumentation framework, please?
Yes, so generally in an argument you have a claim and an evidence. Here we have the part that we do the claim detection. So we focus on particular type of claims, which are the statistical claims, and we consider that the evidence we can gather is found in our reference data sets. So we are not doing end-to-end fact verification. So we are not saying if a claim is true, we are going to leave the journalist to do that. It was a very important step for them. But for us, the evidence is in the reference data sets, and we are doing the claim detection. So this is a very standard argument which has a claim and a set of evidence to back it up.
Thanks for this very interesting presentation. So I have a question about when you try to detect conflicts of interest. So you have triplets, if I have well understood. You have authors, you have relations, and you have companies. I was wondering if you can capture also like relations of like transition from academia to business, because this is something which is very frequent. So people who like publish or who are like politicians, and then they transition to like private companies. And so the conflict of interest emerges a posteriori. So not in the moment of a publication or not in the moment in which they participate to legislation, but later. Can you capture such things with your framework?
So currently we are not looking at this. In particular, we didn't do author disambiguation because it was very difficult with the data that we had. So we didn't have sufficient information on the authors to say that this is the same or a different person. But I agree that this is important. If when we are able to have a data set which is clear that authors are disambiguated, then we can also incorporate this temporal aspect, which I think is very important here. I agree with this.
For my understanding, you firstly split the, let's say, the test into claims, and then you have like a reference database, and you do a kind of similarity search based on top key, and then you perform the fact check. Now my question is, let's say that we have, in a case we don't have like a similar, let's say, reference data in the database. How do you perform the fact check in that case?
So here, as I said, we don't say for a claim if it's true or false. We just try to gather evidence for the journalist to decide this. So in the case where we don't have any data related to this, so we will not show any results. So here, the top K statistical facts we will not have statistical facts to verify this claim.
Since the top K here is based on similarity, it means that even if we don't have similar data, we'll have top K anyhow.
Yeah, so here, yes, you could still have answers that are not pertinent. So we are trying to avoid this, so to have not show a result after a certain threshold if the results are really far away from the claim that has been shown.
Okay, thank you.
A short question on conflict of interest. Did you check as well the family link or private link like this? And if yes, to what extent? Because could be friends, and when you have conflict of interest, you can be yourself involved in contract with other company, but there are conflict as well within the family. By example, do you take that into consideration?
Yeah, so we didn't have access to this type of information, so we only focused on relations between authors of scientific papers and companies. This is what we focused on. It's very interesting to look at family links, but we didn't have access to this kind of information. But I agree, it's very, very important.
Thank again Oana for her presentation, very rich. And let us invite Sasha to the stage now. Thank you, Sasha.
So thank you for having me. Today I will answer the question, is the AI misinformation apocalypse coming? And basically what I will do is just challenge some common narratives about misinformation. So I will argue first that misinformation consumption is low, which is quite similar to what Oana Goga said, that people are not so gullible, that misinformation is often a symptom of deeper problems, and then I will talk about AI. So first, since 2016, there has been a lot of work trying to quantify the prevalence of misinformation. So in 2016, people were super worried about fake news because of Trump, because of the Brexit. So people were super worried and attributed the rise of populism and Brexit to fake news. So there has been a lot of studies on that. And here's just an overview. What they found basically is that on social media like Facebook or Twitter, it's like super small, around 5% or below. And I will quickly give an example of some work I did at Oxford, where we tried to quantify the infodemic. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, people were super worried about the infodemic. They said that in addition to the virus, there was also this infodemic, like people were surrounded by false information. So we tried to quantify that in 4 countries by looking at what people actually consumed during that time and the effect that the COVID pandemic had on news consumption. So we did that in the US, France, Germany, and the UK. And we use NewsGuard, so it's imperfect, but it's at least pretty good, to rate the accuracy of the sources that people were consuming. So basically sources that have a high score of like 80 to 100 are like Le Monde, France Info, so they are considered pretty good and they are accurate, and sources that have a score around 40 or 20 are considered pretty bad, like Demotivateur, Russia Today, Santé Plus Mag, and so we try to quantify how this changed. And this is the evolution of visit to news websites in French between 2017 and 2021. So first you see that in green and dark green, like the mainstream news outlets that are the most reliable dominate the visit to news websites. And you see that in red, the least reliable sites are quite small. You also see that in March 2020, there has been a huge increase in news consumption that is unprecedented in the data, and it's when the World Health Organization announced that there was a pandemic. So at that time, people consume more news and mainly turn to mainstream news outlets that are the most reliable. And we find this exact same pattern in the 4 countries that we studied. In the US, UK, France, and Germany, there is this same peak in March 2020, and it mainly attributed to the most reliable news outlets. So contrary to the infodemic narrative, at least when it comes to news websites, people mainly turn to just the most reliable and mainstream news websites. So I've been talking about news here, but it's important to put news in perspective, and especially online news. In France, for instance, there is this study that tried to quantify how much news are people actually exposed online. What they find is that on average, people are exposed to only 3%. So 3% of all the time that French people spend online is attributed to news or like civic content. It's like less than pornography on average. So it's like just very small. And I think it's important when we think about misinformation to remember that just most people are not so interested in news, and when they consume news, they may not primarily consume it online or on news websites. I think it has implications for detection. One is that many hold false beliefs, not because they have been exposed to misinformation and believed misinformation, but simply because they have not been exposed to reliable information or disbelieved it. Just many people don't consume that much news, and that may be why they have false beliefs about the world. And in addition to detecting misinformation, I think it's important to also find ways to increase the uptake and acceptance of reliable information. The second point I'm going to quickly make is that people are not gullible. It's based a lot on the work of my PhD supervisor, Hugo Mercier, and his PhD supervisor, Dan Sperber, who has worked on epistemic vigilance, all the cognitive mechanisms that we have to evaluate communicative information, but also on all the work on political campaigns in the US. Billions of dollars are spent every elections to try to influence voters, and so political scientists have tried to quantify how well does this work. And the answer is not very much. Here's just one example. For instance, in this recent study, they randomized 37,000 Facebook users and 26,000 Instagram users to have political ads completely removed from their feeds for 6 weeks before the 2020 US presidential election. And what they find is no detectable effects of removing these ads on political knowledge, polarization, perceived legitimacy of the election, political participation, or whatever you can imagine. You have bigger studies with like 2 million persuadable voters that find effects that are not zero, but the effects are just very, very small. So with my colleague Jan Pfender, we did this meta-analysis of all the studies that have been done on how much people believe fake news. And since 2016, many online studies have exposed participants to true and false news without telling them, of course, which one is true and which one is false. And so we meta-analyzed that. We meta-analyzed 67 papers, so about 200,000 participants, 300 effect sizes in 40 countries. And what we looked at is just how good are people in this experimental context to tell true from false news. What we find is that in the vast majority of effect sizes, people were able to discern true from false news, and the effect is quite large. So when you look at these studies, people are just very good. But of course, they are not perfect. In yellow, you see the distribution of the accuracy ratings of the true items. In purple, the accuracy ratings of the false items. So you see that the two distributions are separate, so people can discern true from false news, but they are far from perfect. Like they did not rate all the true news as true or all the false news as false. And we try to quantify these mistakes, like how much mistakes people make when rating true and false news. And what we find is that in 2/3 of the cases, people made more mistakes when rating true news than when rating false news. That is, people were more likely to disbelieve true news than to believe fake news. So people showed like a small skepticism bias. They are more likely to say that any news is false rather than any news is true. And I think this has implications for detection. We should not assume that exposure equals acceptance. It's not because that there is some fake news out there that people accept it or believe it or act on it. And instead of teaching lay people to be more critical than they already are, I think it would be good also to try to make them more trusting and of the good stuff, like of reliable information. Another point, which I think is important in my work, is that I think misinformation is often a symptom of deeper problems. And it doesn't mean it's not a cause, but I think it's important to also see it as a symptom. Here is, for instance, the abstract of part of an abstract of a perspective in Nature on misinformation. And what they say is that they document a pattern of low exposure to false and inflammatory content that is concentrated among a narrow fringe with strong motivation to seek out such information. So as Oana said, in the media we hear a lot about algorithms, etc., but it's important to remember that people have agency, and often what these studies have shown is that the people who consume and share a lot of misinformation, they are not representative of the general population. They are just a small minority who are very vocal, very active. So when we open Twitter, etc., we see them. They appear very big, but they're actually quite small. And here's another study in Nature on the role of algorithms on exposure to hyperpartisan and false information on Google searches. And what they find is that exposure to and engagement with partisan and unreliable news on Google searches are driven not primarily by algorithmic curation, but by users' own choices. So in the debate about fake news, etc., it's important to remember the role of people. But of course, we should regulate algorithms, make them better, etc., but let's not forget about the people. There are also many studies showing that people believe and share misinformation simply because they are angry at the government. And instead of thinking about political in terms of left and right, the literature in political science shows that it's better to look at it in terms of distance towards institutions. At least in Western democracies, the further away people are from institutions, the more they are likely to believe in misinformation and share it. And this is a nice study in France looking at what they did first is just they tried to map the people on Twitter who are climate denialists, so who have beliefs and who share information that goes against the scientific consensus on climate. So they mapped them, I think they were around 30,000. Then the COVID pandemic happened. And these people who were climate denialists, they were sharing anti-vax content. Then the war in Ukraine happened, and they were sharing Russian propaganda. And this is just an infinite loop. Like they are just going to believe and share anything that goes against the institutions and against the consensus. So these people, they don't really care about climate change or about vaccines. They just have positions that are in opposition to what mainstream and politicians say. And so every time we have problems like the rejection of science, the rise of populisms, or these kinds of things, there is misinformation. So I think in all these cases, we are tempted to attribute the problems to misinformation. And I think that's a mistake. In my model, I think that misinformation is more like the leaves of the tree. It's something very visible that we see. But we need to understand why are the leaves there? Like why is this tree so healthy? So we need to understand the roots. Like what makes this tree grow so fast, so much? And I think here there are like some psychological, individual, socio-political predispositions that make people believe, consume, and share misinformation that are important to study. And I think we should also look at the fertile ground, like what makes the root grow. And in that case, we know, for instance, that in some countries, people are more likely to believe misinformation than in others. Like in Nordic European countries, people believe in conspiracy less than like in Southern European countries. And at the country level, it's correlated with things like corruption. So the more you live in a corrupt country, the more you're likely to believe in conspiracy theories and that kind of sense. I think there will be misinformation as long as people have reasons to believe in misinformation or conspiracy theories. And most interventions against misinformation, unfortunately, I think, are doomed to play a game of whack-a-mole. It's still good to fact-check, etc. But if people have motivations to believe and share these things, they will appear over and over again. Now, what about AI? There have been a lot of scary headlines about the role of AI and generative AI in particular in the democratic process, like AI deepfakes threaten to upend global elections. No one can stop them. I've written 2 pieces on what I think about this, and I've looked specifically at the case of election during the 2024 election cycle in the world, because more than half of the world population voted in 2024, and there were a lot of worries of the influence of generative AI, and I will talk about that. So the first worry is that AI makes misinformation cheaper to produce. So with LLMs, you can produce misinformation faster and cheaper. I think I'm not so worried about that because, and again, all I'm going to talk here is speculative. Like I don't have a crystal ball. We'll see what happens, but this is my take. I think the bottleneck today is attention. It's not how much content you can create, it's whether people are going to see it. And it's not because there is more misinformation that people will consume more of it. People who engage with misinformation usually aren't fooled into it, they actively seek it out. And despite the quantity and accessibility of misinformation today, you have so many junk websites or like very bad content online. Despite that, the average internet users consume very little of it. And it's a bit like saying, oh, if I have more umbrellas in my store, I'm going to sell more umbrella, but that's not how it works. You need to have something that makes people want more umbrellas. And that's why I think generative AI is not going to make people want more umbrellas or more misinformation. Another worry is that AI is going to increase the quality of misinformation. And I think demand for misinformation is actually quite easy to satisfy. And the most viral misinformation is often very unsophisticated. So this was an example of Elon Musk sharing a deep fake of Kamala Harris, portraying her as a communist, very unsophisticated. Everyone knows it's fake. People share it and engage it for other reasons. Another example of unsophisticated misinformation, just Trump saying, watch for voter fraud because we win easily. Without voter fraud, we win so easily. Again, he doesn't need deepfakes. He doesn't need complicated AI models. For realistic deepfakes to have an influence, people need also to be exposed to the deepfake. And still, to learn about the world and important topics, people mostly still turn to mainstream news. So I'm not too worried. And the content or quality of misinformation is less important than the broad narrative it supports, like whether it is pro-immigration, anti-immigration, blah, blah, blah. That's more important than the quality of the content. And also, realistic fake is not a new problem. We have always been able to fake speech, text, photos, yet we still use these. So of course we are going to need to adapt, but I'm sure we are going to figure it out. And some data on the 2024 elections and the influence of AI. Across the 2024 elections, AI-generated content was actually only a tiny fraction of the misinformation that people saw. We know, for instance, that on Meta, less than 1% of the fact-checked misinformation was AI-generated in 2024. And when AI did show up, a lot of the time it was satire, memes, or campaign tools like translation, and not really deception. And the consensus, at least from the 2024 election, is that the misinformation that spread during these elections, because there was misinformation, there was problems, etc., is that misinformation relied on old, familiar tricks, like out-of-context images, false claims, or cheap fakes. So like very cheap manipulations. And traditional influence, like politicians abusing their power, parties and medias, matter far more than AI. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I actually have a first question. Thank you for the fact-checking. Very welcome on the AI. You talk about effects on average, right, that you have looked at. What about more typically seen as vulnerable populations, and I'm thinking particularly of teenagers or children? How does everything you talked about apply or not apply? Or are they different people? Are they more vulnerable? Are they actually better equipped than the current adults? Because obviously this is tremendously generationally driven, right?
This is a very difficult question. What I can say first is that it's very difficult to study teenagers, so there are very little data on them. The other thing we know is that when you look at trace data and look at, I don't know, how much people consume hyperpartisan or misinformation, older people consume much more of it just because they are more interested in politics, they are more partisan, so they consume more of it. But in experiments, when you see how good people are at telling true from false news, older people are actually also better a little bit because they have more crystallized knowledge about politics, and so they're actually a little bit better. But basically, we don't know that much about teenagers, and it's also harder to study them because their information practices are just harder to capture with the methods that we have.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. I actually have two questions. One is related to the study that you presented, where you're claiming that basically people are pretty good in recognizing fake content, and they even question the real one. I was wondering, what do they know that they need to classify fake and not fake content? Because from what I know from the critical thinking, one of the things actually that's most difficult for a person is to have this question. Like, if I am reading a paper and to question, is it true? It's the hardest step actually. So I was wondering, what is exactly the prompt kind of that you ask them? And the other one is, I suppose that you know, like the literature about that shows that Twitter is influencing the political opinions of people on Twitter. There have been quite a lot of like more social computational sociology articles on that. What is your opinion on that?
So your first question is actually a limitation of our study that we discuss, is that to measure how much people believe true and false news, you need to ask them in some way whether they believe it. And in all the papers that we meta-analyze, there are many different questions, but they are all about how accurate, whether it's true. So they all prompt some forms of critical thinking, I would say. And of course, when people browse through social media, they are not thinking about accuracy all the time. So their behavior when we don't ask them whether it's true or false is probably different. And that's why there are some interventions against misinformation that try to prompt this and just like have like accuracy prompts just to like prompt accuracy in the minds of people so that they care more about what they share, what they engage with. But we can talk about that more. And the second question, sorry, what was it again? Yeah, Twitter. Yeah, I mean that's one study. I feel like they are quite a bit now, and they all tend to go in the direction that like the effects are small on behaviors or attitudes outside of the platform. There are quite a few studies on like Facebook and Instagram showing that switching, for instance, from the chronological feed to the engagement feed influence a lot the behaviors of people on the platform, but not really their behaviors or attitudes outside the platform. But the Twitter study you mentioned is very good, and it's a point in the direction of like, oh, these effects are not zero; they exist. But overall, I would say the literature shows that they are small, but we need more studies.
So you talked a little bit about generative AI impacts in terms of generating new fake news, but isn't the impact of AI also on recommender systems and what you show to anyone? And isn't that a bigger impact in terms of making, I mean, if not clusters, networks of people that have the same beliefs? And it probably goes even beyond right and wrong information, right? Sometimes it's hard to classify, but it can be one, let's say, political wing and one other one. And do you think that the impact, I mean, your statement that you are not worried is kind of a strong statement compared to, I would say, the general belief? What's your position on that?
Can you, I'm not sure to have fully understand your question.
Recommender systems. In some sense,
Yeah.
I mean, like, recommender systems have shaped the world far more than generative AI for the moment. And the danger of generative AI is probably far, I mean, or the impact can be much bigger because it's combined to tools that enable to adapt the type of content to people. I mean, like basically, just the basics of recommender systems. So I don't think we should evaluate the impact of generative AI just by what meme has had the most effect, but probably more on how much it shaped the community of information. And those community of information, it's not necessarily black and white, fake news or actual news. It's just, are you exposed to news feeds coming from one party or another one, or news feed on, let's say, to be like ecological disasters or immigration, just to be, I mean, say, like, possibly a bit naive.
So I think it's a long conversation, but first I think it would be very hard to quantify. And I was going to say you can also think about the effects of generative AI, of like how people use these tools like to get information and things like that. And on that, I would say that they probably will have positive effects. And when it comes to algorithms, what matters more is just the business models of the platforms and how these AI are used to either, like, I don't know, improve the accuracy of people's beliefs or increase the time that people spend on the platform. And so in that case, I think what matters the most is not whether they are using sophisticated AI or not, but just their goals and what they want to do with the AI.
Is it possible to have access to the data of like some secret services because they know the source of misinformation, especially for elections? Like we know some countries like Russia or Israel, they invest human and material resources. Maybe we can like have some trend and see if there is a correlation between the money they put and the effect on the population or election.
Yeah, that would be great, but I'm not sure the secret services are like the best at sharing their data and open science. But let me know if you. But after the fact, they sometimes publish publicly some lists of like, I think for the 2016 U.S. presidential election, they released a list of like accounts that they thought was like from Russia, and but they released it like after the fact, like 4 years later or something like that.
My question is more around sort of informal media in terms of social media, but also places like WhatsApp, where people can send multiple broadcast messages to people. And particularly when you look at vulnerable people, so older people, younger people, or even uneducated people, semi-educated people who do not necessarily have access to media, did you factor this in? Because I feel like they tend to be a bit more prone to misinformation. Also because, firstly, they do not have access to information, genuine information, but also because, this is what they see every day, and these are the messages they get.
Yeah, so the short answer is we have very little data on these private platforms for privacy, but also data regulation questions. But we do have some researchers that are doing a lot of work on WhatsApp groups in India. And so from that work, we know, for instance, that in political WhatsApp groups in India, there is some misinformation, but not that much. And one main reason is that people mainly don't discuss politics on these groups. They just talk to each other and socialize. And from these WhatsApp groups and these studies, we also know that there wasn't that much AI misinformation, but they were using AI, again, also mostly to socialize and say hi and share random stuff. But again, we don't know much. There is also some work in Brazil that is being done, but we'll know more, let's say, in the next few years.
Thank you so much, Sasha. We have now concluded the 3 research presentations tonight. And it is now my pleasure to welcome our external speaker, Jordan Ricker, who is the Chief Operating Officer of an Opinion Research Institute that he's going to tell you all about. Welcome, Jordan.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm not a researcher indeed. I come from journalism and communication, but I work with researchers at OPSI. We do a lot of R&D in our projects, so I'm going to try to talk to you about it. So who are we? Well, this is Nicu Șardan, the president of Romania, and this is us. This was 2 weeks ago. We presented an important report on disinformation in Romania. We were super proud to do so, and how naive were we, because just the day after, there was 200 press articles in the far-right media in Romania telling how crooked we were and how evil agents from the evil European Union we were. And so that was happy for a few hours and then super, super unhappy. And I will tell you how we managed to deserve such a warm welcome from the extremists. What do? We are fighting disinformation, but more broadly than that, we are trying to produce some information intel to organizations to help them tackle the issue that is the weaponization of information and public debate. Those organizations will be NGOs, institutions, or companies, because they are also concerned by disinformation. I will just mention as a forward a study that we published with Soprasteria Group earlier this year. Maybe you heard about it, about the cost of disinformation, which we try to evaluate. And the results were that it is, to our estimation, around 400 billion euros per year. You can find the study online, and it's super interesting. I would just like to mention one thing, which is one very specific thing, but that I found super interesting, which is the work of a woman called Victoire Rio, who has an organization named What to Fix, and she's working on the revenue sharing program of the social media platforms like Facebook and TikTok and YouTube, where if you publish videos that are working well, then they are sharing with you part of the ad revenue, the ads that are displayed before or after it. And what her work is showing, and she's been documenting it for many, many years now, is that a lot of accounts that are publishing disinformation content actually don't care at all about the fact that it is disinformation content. It is just content that is performing well. And they are taking it from elsewhere, like an account on TikTok that is taking videos from YouTube, looking at the performance of those videos on YouTube, and then publishing it on TikTok on its own account and gaining money with that. So maybe it's following the previous argument about how we should look at disinformation and maybe moderate some of the fears around it. Well, there is also part of the disinformation that is unrelated to the content in itself. On what kind of projects do we work on? The main one is for the European Commission, and it is called the European Narrative Observatory. For 18 months, we've been working on it. It is called Prompt. You can also find it online and the report associated to it. For this work, we monitored 6 countries in 8 languages on 3 specific topics: the war in Ukraine, the trouble to elections, and the threats to LGBTQI rights and freedoms on 8 different social media platforms. The idea was to work on identifying patterns of disinformation propagation. This work is continuing right now with a new project that is called SPINE, and now it's 27 countries, 24 languages, is on all platforms, on any topic and in real time, and it is made for counteraction. So how can we tackle such an ambitious program? Well, first, I would like to answer a question related to the title of the conference, fake news. Is fake what we are looking for? So those kind of videos, there are lots of them online. And if you saw, there was the Sora logo on it, because it was just made freely with the Sora tool from OpenAI. And the question is it important that it is fake? And the answer is probably no, for, I guess, 2 reasons. One is that when you look at the comments, people don't say, it is true, it is fake, who is that guy, what is happening? They are just reiterating their fear, their angst, their anger, which is pre-existing. And this video is just pushing the buttons on something that they already feel. So whether it's true or whether it's not, it doesn't matter. And if you want to measure the actual impact of this disinformation, it is absolutely unrelated to the fact that it is not true. So we are not that interested in the fake content or the fake news. The second aspect of it is that I feel we are underestimating the level of digital illiteracy and media illiteracy online. And if, here I was giving the example of the Sora logo, but you have much worse examples, and it was stated before that Donald Trump doesn't spend a lot of energy to make his speech believable. You have many examples of like screenshots of TV news, where you have a fake BFM logo that is just like drawn in paint in 1995. And when you look at it, you think like obviously it's fake, because you have a background of media literacy and digital literacy, and it's natural to you. But for many people, it's not. And just because the title is confirming something that they already believe, then they believe that it is actually true. I'm going to give another example of something that we worked on related to the cocaine, the bag of cocaine in the hand of Macron, allegedly, in the train. It was like a year and a half ago, maybe you remember that. And there was this huge news telling us that there was this important disinformation online, a huge phenomena, and people believing it, etc., etc. A few remarks about it. First, if you look at the Macron plus cocaine topic online since many, many years, you see that the far right and the conspiracy theorists have always tried to push that narrative, because it's such usual, like the people governing us are morally deviant. And so what is called the panel proxy here is the activity of far-right accounts. And you see that it's a story that has always been existing until it pops out. So why, at some point, did it pop? It's not the usual ways that suddenly worked. The usual ways being implicit repetition, so always talking about with insinuation that you've seen probably the images of Macron like touching his nose or stuff like that, and saying that he must be drugged or is too vibrant, and there was the same with Sarkozy before, etc. It's not really the explicit exposition either, because you have a lot of accounts that are saying like they are using coke, but it doesn't work. And what we see when it actually works is that we have a lot of engagement around accounts that are coordinated and that are pushing the narrative. So here the accounts with, associated with the usual sharing of Russian disinformation. So that might be a clue. At a certain time there is a coordination, but why weren't there a coordination before? And is this coordination really the explanation, considering that if we look at the engagement at the point where it actually pops, we see that the engagement around those accounts is actually pretty low. So it's not on those contents shared by the malicious actors that the internet users like you and me are engaging with, are reacting to. What we see when the media is covering it at that point is what is actually a fake news. The story is not particularly agitating the conspiracy theorists. It's something else that is happening. And it is actually related to the media coverage on it, of it and the chronology of the disinformation spreading. So if we look at who has actually talked about the topic, we see that on International Post is the MAGA community that pushed the narrative. And it's actually Alex Jones, the podcaster, YouTuber that just lost his media. If you're familiar with this, if you're not familiar with the story, look at it, it's really funny. He shared the video saying, oh, Macron is doing coke. And then the whole MAGA community just reshared it, but it stayed enclosed inside this community. But because it's big, it was a little bit bigger than usually what the far right does. And so the media began sharing articles about it, and this is what we see here, the media there, doing fact-checking. But is it fact-checking really? No, it's clickbait. For any kind of media that is supposed to be serious, well, they are also in competition with all the other media, and they have to do these stories. And all these stories that day was, non, Macron n'avait pas consommé de cocaïne. Or, Macron obligé de s'expliquer sur l'affaire de la cocaïne. Any kind of titles that even if you know and understand that it's untrue, you're going to click because it's Macron cocaine and you want to know about it. It's natural. Does it explain it all? Not really, because if you look at the figures, it's until that point, there's a lot of coverage, a lot of engagement on the media coverage, but it's not the phenomena that was described. What is actually, what has actually become the phenomena was the memes and the AI fun content made about it. So at that point, everybody was sharing the starter packs on LinkedIn. Well, there was this meme with Macron and the cocaine. But most of all, the video, and because it's a serious audience, I put that screenshot and not what happens next, but they get half naked dancing in the train. And this is where this is what people were sharing. The conclusion is not that it's not that bad, because no one was actually believing that Macron was dancing half naked in the train. But the idea that is conveyed, it is the one that everything is ridiculous. Like the people who govern us, this is all a shit show, and whether it's made to be a shit show like Trump is doing, whether it's not made consciously, well, the idea is hurtful to the democracy, and so, to my view, it is extremely concerning. So if we are not looking at fake, if we're not looking at the actual content that we feel is not that important, what are we aiming at? we try to put probes and to do data collection that, with the help of human refinement, is going to help us calculate the actual propagations. And what do I mean with that? I'm going to go super fast about our technical apparatus, but we have open data. It comes from social media, from the press, from the organization we are working with, or from LLMs. I'm going to talk about that in 1 minute. Then we have the processing AI, which is trying to understand all that content and trying to qualify it, to recognize patterns. And with that, we have as outputs either a SaaS solution or custom solution for the organization we are working with, or interoperable data, so it can be used by other organizations. What it does at first is trying to work on narratology. Narratology is a topic that is heavily discussed because a lot of actors, Viginium for instance, is considering that we don't care about the narrative for several reasons. The first one is that when you are beginning to talk about the narrative, you are accused of being the thought police, of being the one that is telling which is true, which is not, which is right, which is wrong, which is, of course, a super uncomfortable position, and which is what happened to us in Romania. The other reason is that, and as you just said, it's more or less always the same underlying ideological and emotional drivers that are under these narratives. So is it super interesting to work on it? Some argue that it's not. Yet it's the what, and we have to work on the what. So we are trying to use AI to identify those patterns in some kind of a circle that help us always enhance the recognition tools. And these agents, they are well, I don't want to emphasize on the word agent because some are not autonomous in the sense of AI agent. It's kind of untrue, but it's just to express the idea that it's little bricks of analysis that combined together are helping us having a better understanding. And so the idea is to separate the wheat from the chaff, to identify only the contents that are actually interesting in terms of their power of propagation. The materialization of that is a monitoring dashboard where we look at, this is the example of Romania, the main meta-narratives, and we try to monitor which are the biggest ones, which are changing, which have the most potential of growing, etc. And I'm going to comment the different colors in a bit. We also try to do some prediction, and this is something that we could talk about mathematically speaking. It's super hard. We are almost beginning to manage to do a little bit of relevant prediction, but it's extremely complicated, and I'm interested to talk to you about that afterwards. We are trying to identify the persuasion techniques and the rhetorical mining. This is unreadable, but this is all the techniques and all the rhetorical devices that we try to look at. What we are, in the end, looking at is the ones that are mostly used by some communities to try to identify then the other contents that will be spread using the same devices. We are also working on with AI for video processing, to do some visual clustering or semantic clustering. I can also talk more about that afterwards. I have to go fast. Yeah, it's super interesting also technically. I will go fast about that again. What is the interest of AI? What I just showed is the AI enablers. If it was done by hand, it will cost 30,000 euros. With OpenAI credits, 3,000 euros, and with trained models, 30 euros. It just gives you an idea of the use of AI to do such qualitative work. We also look at TTPs. It is also unreadable. If you're not familiar with the disarm matrix, this is a complete table. What I just wanted to say here is that it's super complicated, and that when we dive into the complex analyticals of narratives online and technicals of propagation, sometimes it gets too complicated. It's actually not that usable in terms of counteraction. coordinated inauthentic behavior, it is much simpler. We just look at narrative proximity and temporal proximity. What is interesting here is that before AI, we did that with words. So to check coordinated behavior, it had to be the same words. Now with AI, it's just the same ideas. So finally, we look at social media, but we also look at the LLMs as a zone of the public space. I will comment later on that scheme, but it's rather self-explanatory. What we do is we audit the models to identify some societal bias, cultural bias in it. And doing so, we audit the disinformation inside the models. What are the narratives that are actually relayed by the models, or are the models allowing themselves to replicate those narratives? If you want to know more, please listen to our podcast. It's super.
Thank you, Jordan. That was our format in the meetups is ruthless, right? It's a little short. 15 minutes to give it all is always constraining. Are there questions for Jordan before we turn to the roundtable? Yes.
Well, thank you for your talk. I have a question. Actually, it concerns all the talks of today, because it seems that what your talk is about is more of like the post and the influence of popular people on social media, and their influence also on the opinion, on the public opinion. While the others, it seems more like focus on the news that people are spreading, and especially like fake news, the one that are actually disinformation, so with some fake information that is inserted with purpose to be toxic. My question is, what's, for example, also the impact, have you measured also the impact that the other study did? Because it seems like they're saying opposite stuff. One is that we're not much exposed actually to misinformation and disinformation, while yours it seems more like it's more dangerous when we're more exposed. So it seems there is a discrepancy between news and actually what public, let's say, figures are doing. So my question is also, there is a study on that, on the exposure about people on fake news and misinformation that is actually done by political figures or something like that.
Yeah, so there are many studies on specific topics, specific regions, etc. One that we actually did in Romania was to see when you create a TikTok account, what is shown to you, and the result was that the first 50 videos, 9 of them were disinformation content. So even the fact that that much content is political is kind of crazy. But if you do the same test in France, it won't be the case. So it's also related to the media landscape. And regarding actors, what I wanted to show there is that in purple is the usual suspects relaying disinformation content. In red is the official accounts, like official press, elected official, etc. And in green, the influencers, whatever the topic. And so what you see is that most of the accounts sharing disinformation are super spreaders, the vectors of disinformation. But here, the officials, they are whitewashers. They are making it legit for part of the audience. And then the influencers, they are not just a few of them, but they are spreading it wider and to audience that are believing it because it's legit as they see it.
You talked about the cost of the damage of misinformation. Is there a way to evaluate the cost of what it costs to do misinformation, and eventually what's the return of investment of these people that are spreading this?
Well, I think there are two things that we can say. One is that it is much cheaper than it was, thanks to AI. But I wouldn't be able to give the ratio, but obviously it's like 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times cheaper than it was. The other thing that I can say is that the amount of money spent by the Kremlin is quite well documented. But we actually don't know how much is actually spent in the end in the actual operations, because it is Russia and because everything is dysfunctional, because everything is corrupt, etc., etc. So we know that it's around 2 billion a year, I think, $2 billion. So it's enormous. It's a few hundred times all the budgets of the European countries dedicated to the fight against disinformation. but which amount of this 2 billion actually end up in the operations, this is hard to say, and probably less than a small portion of it.
Hello, and I have one more question regarding what happens after. Because you showed us the tools that we have the tools to evaluate fake news and to evaluate their how they affect which kind of like populations the information reaches. But who do you think should be responsible for moderation and limiting access? Because on the one hand, when it comes to, for example, social media users, we have free speech. Everyone is allowed to, in their personal capacity, say things that are untrue. But then, like, we have the platforms. Do you think it should be the platforms? It should be the legislator? Obviously, we cannot do it by ourselves to verify all the fake news and fake information. As you showed us, it requires quite a lot of investment and having the proper tools. So what is your view? Who should take responsibility for, like, maybe cleaning up some of the fake information, or you think it should stay as it is?
Well, I wouldn't have an interesting answer to that because it's such a complicated philosophical debate about freedom of speech. The only thing that I can say is that in the actual legal framework that is existing in Europe, the platforms do not do what they are obliged to. So when they receive some signaling using the proper channels to do so, they are not doing their job by taking all the content down, etc. This is what is Victoire Rio is documenting, for instance, and we should start by that, enforcing law that already exists. Then it's a complicated debate.
All right, let me invite all our speakers now to go on stage, please, and each take one of the seats. I will stay here myself, and I will also open the discussion to the room. Very simple question to get started, and all of you gave nuances, bits of answers, of course, of it. But if we were to ask you to what extent you think that we need to worry at all about fake news for the next presidential election anywhere around the globe, but let's focus on France, it is coming soon. What's your sense today? Are you worried?
I think you have the data. You should go first.
Yeah, I am, kind of. But not, as I said, focused on the fake content, but more on the absence of political response to the performance of the underlying emotional drivers of this disinformation. So if people are reacting and engaging on videos of farmers crying, is because they have so much to express that is not answered by the political offer. So to me, it's extremely concerning, but on a political ground, not so much on a technical disinformation propagation ground.
If I can jump on that, I'm fully on board. Like I also agree. I'm more worried about like the root cause of the problem, and I don't know what makes people want to vote for populist leaders who have anti-democratic orientation or problematic policies. So I'm more worried about why people, and increasingly people, tend to be attracted towards these candidates than about the content itself, whether it's false or not.
I think that I agree with both of you and what you said in your presentations. And but I think fake news, it's only a very small part of the problem, because the majority of information that goes online, it is not fact checkable. It's their opinion, their grievances, and it cannot be, we cannot classify it as a fact check. We also looked at the Romanian elections and what happened. So I don't know whether you know, but in Romania they cancelled elections because they found evidence that influencers, they were sponsored by Russian agencies to promote one particular candidate, and they canceled them because they thought that it was an unfair election because one person got an increased and amplified exposure because of this coordinated campaign on TikTok. So we studied a bit the campaign, or what it still left on it, and most of the amplification comes from comments. So I think there is a lot of focus on detecting disinformation and studying disinformation, but I feel like the type of campaign is changing, and it's not necessarily that someone is posting a fake news, but it's amplified in the comments. Narratives are amplified in the comments, and information is amplified in the comments. And the reason why this is very dangerous is that whenever you see an information, a post, I don't know what others are doing, but I'm checking the post to see how other people are reacting. So if this signal of how other people are reacting is biased because of a coordinated influence campaigns, I think this might be possible to change the opinion or the emotions of people. So more on not so positive.
I also have one last thing. So I would also be afraid of who is paying for the certain journalists. So I think what we are seeing today is a rise of the extreme right. So also a reduction of like a hope to reduce social rights. And my question is, who is putting the money for this? And I think a lot of this comes from very rich people that could own journals. So I think we all should also look like certain actors that are influencing the opinion in order to get what they want. And in order to do that, you always have to find a culprit. So who is responsible for everything that is going wrong in our countries is, of course, not a very rich people. They couldn't be. So is the foreigners and the poor people. I think this is a narrative that we have seen being repeated over and over in the media, and I think we should ask ourselves, why is this the case? And I believe that is also because who is paying for those narratives to be written in the media.
Another question, a little, maybe more positive. So you've been talking about fake news being scanned, right? Eventually, because we need to know for sure it needs to be verifiably fake, right? And I wonder if you turn this around on its head, if there is not an opportunity with AI, most notably, to verify, to ask politicians, for instance, let's take politicians, to ask politicians to be specific in their claims, to be more verifiable, which most of them won't do, we know that, right? But I wonder if a politician that would go for very specific, verifiable claims that would be validated, do you think that person would have an advantage, for instance? Because that could be a very beneficial use of AI, right? It could be a strategy going forward. Like I say things that you can verify, that AI can verify as true or fake, and that in turn would give me more credence. We've been talking about how the political institutions are suffering at the moment, so I'm wondering if there's hope there.
I think this is a very nice question. I think from the technical perspective, we can definitely do it, and it would be very refreshing to see people like this. But you also have other issues like charisma and other things that they have to make work. I don't know if you have more social science intuition about this.
I mean, at least on the use of AI to like facilitate fact checking, there is a little bit of work like on community notes on X. I know we don't like X anymore, but community notes are quite good actually. And now some of the community notes are first written by LLMs, and then humans vote for them, like whether they like them or not. And I think that's a very good use of AI for fact checking, because They just do the first step and they can do it extremely quickly, and then you have humans and experts, etc., that can rate them, and then it gets shown based on how humans react. And so I think that's a good use, and I think there are many other possible uses that we can think of.
If I were to be a conspiracy theorist here, and I listen to your speeches, to your presentations, I would evidently have doubts about all the data you presented, and probably will share different opinions than you have. You have put down X, you have put down Trump, you have put down some of the ideas that I could have belief in. How would you tackle such a situation?
I can take this. So all studies have biases, and this is why in science we have the pyramid of evidence. And this was first developed in the medical field, that you had some hospital that observed something, and then it was a case report. And then this hospital, instead of just having one patient, they were having a bunch of patients. Then multiple hospitals were looking back at their records and analyzing adversarial effects of a medication. But anyway, what I want to say is that one study saying fake information, it's up to 5%, you can challenge, say, maybe this is biased. But when you have 10 studies with all of them different methodologies and different data that they are all saying the same thing, you start to gain in confidence. This is how science works. It's one building on the other and providing stronger and stronger proof.
I think that you are not fighting emotions with data, so I don't see the configuration of such an argument between a conspiracy theorist and a data scientist. But I guess that psychosocial science works show that if you engage with someone and not in a trying to contradict them, but trying to ask new questions, then you can slowly show them that the ones that he is asking himself are not the proper ones, or if he turn the topic around or see it another way, etc., he can change his opinion. But then how do you put that at scale? I don't know.
Actually, there is a little bit of work on the use of AI to convince like conspiracy theorists or people who are against vaccine, against GMOs, etc. And it has been shown that actually chatting with like the latest version of Claude or ChatGPT can convince conspiracy theorists to not believe some conspiracy they believe in, like, I don't know, 9/11 or some things, just with facts. Like just facts. It's just that they are tirelessly giving facts, and that often when you talk to someone who believes in many conspiracy theories, they have a lot of arguments, a lot of facts that are very hard to debunk on the fly, but actually the best AI can do it, and it's a little bit convincing. Then the problem is, how do we make sure that people actually engage with this AI in these ways to be convinced? So that's another question, of course, but facts can actually help a little bit.
Actually, in behavioral science, there's also the wonderful finding that when we talk to AI, so the Claude, Chat, Gemini, whichever you have, all three, probably you spend more time right now with them than with your partner, by the way. There's beginning to be evidence of that, that we are less biased when we receive information. So when we talk, when we exchange human-to-human information, we're a lot more biased and a lot more likely to defend our stand, whereas when we're in front of Claude, we lower our vigilance, and we're much more permeable to facts and any information. So maybe also more permeable to fake news. I don't know.
Just to add a bit of data on that, because we are looking at conversations that people have with GPT and Gemini in the political context. And it's not always the case that they are improving their conspiracy beliefs. They can also go on the other side. And we do have data that's saying, oh, this is such a novel way of looking at this problem. Not many people are able to loudly say this. So it also sometimes it's encouraging conspiracy theories. So we need to pay attention.
So you said that we shift to get information from social media to LLM. So we know that the information, we can have the source right now, but we don't know how it's ranked. And probably they have access to free content that is more fake than the other one. So what do you know about that? Because if we are going to have information through LLM, there is a space to explore in it. And I don't know what you know about that. And how we will face that, because right now you are looking to the social media that it's like probably not the source they are looking when they ask when we ask LLM. Probably they look at something else at the social media, many other content, and the free one are okay, and the paid one is not okay. Especially the academic science is not open source, most of them.
So this is a fantastic question. How do they choose the sources that they promote? And on Google search, we somehow understand that they are doing this graph, and based on the popularity of the website, they are promoting the what are the most relevant and popular sources related to your question. But now, when you go on these really long conversations, and you're not sure to which extent all the LLMs have access to popularity metrics of website. I don't know, but this is a very good question. We can try to audit them to see what are the sources that they provide. Newer reasoning models are doing this. They provide the actual sources, so that might be a first step. But lots of work to still be done.
We know that AI poisoning actually works because malicious sources are found in answers from the models, and this is why Russia is developing all those news websites that do not have really genuine visits, but are just made to nurture the models. But it's still super minor. Because most of the model work the same kind of way Google does, or use the Google data. So other studies shows that most of the sources are kind of the same than the first page of Google. What we don't know is what you said. If it's you engage in a long conversation, then it's the long tail. And as on Google, if you go on in the long tail, then you will find suspicious sources. The last thing is that OpenAI is doing some partnerships with media and over-promoting the media that they have business deals with. So I guess the question, it will be mostly this one, is which company do I trust looking at the deals that it has? Because do I want to see more of Le Monde or not, depending on my beliefs?
Thank you. We talked a lot about how people can be the subject of propaganda. And what about LLMs being the victim and then being the vector of that propaganda and misinformation in general?
So I think similarly to what it was proposed to audit what people see on social media, we should also be able to see the data that LLMs are trained on. Currently, this is not the case. So for very few models, we know what the kind of data that are being trained on. So we need access to this kind of data to know what they are learning. So this is something very important that we should be able to have.
So there is a legislation in California where they need to say what is the data that they are trained on, but they are pushing back with lawyers and stuff. So they haven't published, I think, yet. But that's something that it's good.
Well, what we do every night is we take all the debunks gathered by Google Fact Check. So there are tools that is just gathering all the press in the world that is doing some debunks. And so it's a few hundreds to a few thousand articles per day. And we inject them into the main LLMs to see if they are willing to kind of relay these narratives that were debunked. And secondly, if they are okay to replicate it, if you are asking them to replicate replicate it, as if you were a disinformation agent trying to multiply disinformation. And so we do some ratings of the model on a daily basis. And what we see is that they are getting better to prevent the replication and to take distance with the narrative, because they are getting better to analyze the news in real time.
So LLMs are ethical?
No, they're not.
Well, we'll finish on that. It's past 8, and you've been a superb audience. And thank you again to our 4 guest speakers who have shared very valuable insights. Thank you very much. I hope it was thought-provoking for everyone. Let us invite you now for refreshments, aperitif, dînatoire for everybody, and I hope you take this opportunity to meet our guests more closely. Thank you, everyone, and see you at the next meetup in the fall.